Hey there guys, it's Sarah from Rusty Dog & Co. And in today's video, I'm gonna try to solve a pretty big problem that I've been running into recently. You see, I don't own a larger size joiner for this workshop. I do have a smaller benchtop joiner, but I've sort of found that really only works best for smaller size boards. So anytime that I have larger size boards that I need to get a straight edge on, I have to find sort of another way that I can get a straight edge on those boards. And I should say that I prefer to buy rough sawn lumber because, well, it's much cheaper than the pre-service stuff. So the way I've sort of gotten around that is I threw together this very simple joiner jig a while ago. But when I made this one the first time, I think because I was just in a hurry and needed to get something together very quickly, I made this one so that it really has no adjustability. And that means that when I get into a situation where I have a really large and really wide piece like this, this really won't work for it because I don't want to have to cut off so much material just to get a straight edge on the board. So we're going to fix this issue today by basically making a new one of these, but we're gonna make it much more adjustable. All right, let's get started. Now there are lots of different style joiner jigs, and when I was researching which one I wanted to make, I came across a video from Matt over at 731 Woodworks. He created a very simple jig using some dovetail clamps. So his video served as the inspiration for this particular joiner jig that I'm about to make. So the first thing I need to do is create a flat, straight base for this joiner jig. So I'm just ripping down a piece of 3/4 inch plywood here to use as my base. Now I chose to make my jig 12 inches wide by 4 feet long, but you can sort of make this whatever size you want to accommodate what size pieces you work with most. Now in order to make this jig adjustable, I'm going to be using some of these match fit dovetail clamps from Micro Jig. I will route out some grooves with a dovetail bit that will accept these clamps. I went ahead and purchased this particular Micro Jig dovetail bit that works with these clamps, but any dovetail router bit should work fine as well. I got my dovetail bit installed into my router and adjusted the depth so that it would cut 3/8 of an inch into the piece. Now I need to cut 2 long grooves into my piece that are 2 inches from the edge of my board on both sides. To do this, I first make a mark 2 inches from my edges. Then I figure out where I need to place a straight edge so that I can run my router against it to cut out my groove. I'm just using some scrap plywood to act as my straight edge here. Once I have that marked and in place, then I just clamp it down to my piece and run my router against it to cut out my grooves. With those grooves cut, I measure and mark the center of my board. Then I make a mark 4 inches from each of my edges. Finally, I divided my 2 sides in half and placed a mark at 1 foot and 3 feet. Then I just use those marks to route out perpendicular grooves to my longer ones. I initially used a larger square as a straight edge here, but found that a scrap board clamped in place worked much better. The router got away from me a bit here and messed this section up, but that's okay because it's not really going to affect the functionality of this jig. It'll just serve as a visual reminder to me that I'm not perfect. With all my grooves now cut, I use the miter saw to chop off the ends of this jig so that I don't accidentally run into it and puncture myself. This is not a necessary step, but I think it's a nice touch. Next, I took some sandpaper and sanded my grooves to knock down any roughness the router caused, and then gave the whole thing a quick sanding with my sander. Lastly, I applied some paste wax to this jig so that it will easily slide on my table saw. way this jig works is I just place my piece of wood on my jig and hang it over my edge just slightly for the entire length of the board. Then I just take those little micro jig clamps and slide them into my grooves and use them to clamp my board to the jig itself. Now I can take my jig to my table saw and run it through. I do have to raise the height of my blade since my piece is now sitting on this jig. Now the distance from my blade to my fence here is the same width as my joiner jig. I just place my straight edge against that fence and run the jig through. This gives me a perfectly straight edge since it's referencing the straight edge on the other side of the joiner jig that I ran along my table saw fence. Now all I would have to do to continue milling this board would be take my new straight edge I just cut and put that against my table saw fence, and then I can cut this board to whatever width I need. Once that's done, then you'll have 2 straight edges on each side of your board. I can also use this jig for larger boards in the same manner. This board here is about 5 feet long and I'm able to get a straight edge on it easily using this jig. Alright guys, there you have it. One way that you can make an adjustable joiner jig so that you can get nice straight edges on boards of different sizes. Now I can't believe that it actually took me this long to take the time to make a jig like this, because this thing only took me about 30 minutes from start to finish to make. And if I'm being honest with myself, that last joiner jig that I made probably took about that same amount of time or longer. So this was a super quick jig to put together, and I think it's really going to help solve my problem, because I'm pretty sure that I can now use this one jig to get straight edges on pretty much all the material that I'm running through in this shop. That's gonna wrap this one up. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button. That's something that really helps me out and I'd appreciate it. Also consider getting subscribed because I have a lot of builds coming up and I think you would enjoy them. Alrighty guys, I'll be seeing you again soon.